Welcome back to DIY Wood Revival. Today I'm going to show you how I made this desk with Totara top and reclaimed Rimu legs. Let's get started.
I started with the top of the desk, which I'll be making out of a slab of New Zealand Totara that's just over 2 meters long. I used this router jig that I built out of a single sheet of MDF, and if you want to see how I put that together, there's a link in the description. I did about 3 passes on each side and took 3mm off each time. Slow was pro here. There's a bit of flex in the MDF sled, so I couldn't put too much pressure on the router as I went back and forth. I also had to add shims under the slab after each pass because the router bit didn't have enough depth. It took about 45 minutes each pass, and yeah, this was hard on my back, but I think the end result was worth it. This simple sled worked a charm. It only needed a touch up with the sander when I was finished.
So this side is definitely going to be the top side. That is gorgeous.
Then I flipped it over and repeated the process on the other side. I was keen to have a live edge on this side, but there was a few missing chunks, so I decided to square it all off and just go for a simple rectangular desk. Next I ran the circular saw over each side to square it all off, while trying to keep the slab as big as possible. Once I trimmed it to size, I sanded with 120 grit on an orbital sander to get it nice and flat and make it easy to see what I was working with.
Alright, so I'm going to use this Starbond Black CA glue with the accelerator to fill all these cracks. I fill the cracks on the top, the sides, and then try and fill as many of the nail holes on the legs as I can. Don't think I'll do the bottom because I've only got 2 bottles of this. But we'll see how far we get. See how it goes.
The Starbond CA glue worked really well. I used the medium consistency, but it probably would have been easier if I'd used the thick version. Luckily these cracks weren't too deep or big. I found the best way to use it was to spray the accelerator first and then add the CA glue and then spray another coat of the accelerator on top. This stuff also dries super quick. I was sanding it 30 minutes after the first application. I went over the CA glue with 120 grit and then I filled any gaps with another coat of the glue. Next I cut a 45-degree bevel on what will be the underside of the front edge of the desk. This is by far the biggest project I've done, so there was a lot of practice cuts before I was confident enough to make the final cut. As you can see with this bevel, I slowly worked my way down to the final depth. The last step was to go over the front edge and the 2 ends with a round over bit to remove that sharp edge. I got really lucky with the materials for this project. The Totara slab was a freebie from my uncle's farm. And for the legs, I'm going to use these reclaimed Rimu beams that came out of my cousin's house when he pulled down a wall. The beams are a bit rough and they had a bunch of nail holes in them, and there was far more than I needed for this project. To start, I ran everything through the thicknesser just to clean it up and see what I was working with, and then I picked out the best pieces for my project. Once I pulled out all the beams I wanted, I went to work cutting them all to size. I wanted a minimalist leg that didn't take away from the tabletop, so I went for a simple box design with angled and tapered legs. To angle the legs, I cut a 45-degree angle on the end of each apron and a 30-degree cut at the top of each leg, followed by a 15-degree cut on the bottom of each leg. 45 plus 30 plus 15 adds up to 90, so it should end up with a flat foot. Well, at least that's what my thinking is.
So this is basically what the leg's going to end up looking like. I'm going to add a taper down here, and if you want to see how I made the taper jig for that, there's a link in the description below.
I made this for less than $20 and in under 30 minutes, and with it I was able to taper all 4 legs in just a few minutes. And look at that, an identical cut on each leg. Next I had to trim a section off the top of the aprons to make them the same thickness as the legs. Finally, I wanted the top of the desk to look like it wasn't attached to the legs. To do this, I've used stretchers that are slightly wider than the aprons, so that the top of the desk would only be resting on the stretchers. I threw a 15-degree cut on the top corners of the stretchers so that there would be a smooth transition at the joins. Then I was ready to assemble. I used dowels on all my joints, and again, this is something I hadn't done before, so there were a few practice attempts on some scrap wood before I attempted the real joint. I marked, punched, and drilled the holes on each end of the stretchers using this drill guide, with tape on the bit to ensure the holes are straight and the right depth.
So I've got these dowel markers. You push them into the hole that you've already drilled, push up against whatever you're trying to attach on the other side, and just give it a little tap and it leaves an indentation. You're good to go.
These dowel markers were a couple of dollars for a set, and they made the whole process a whole lot easier. As you can see, they perfectly mark out where to drill the other holes. I worked my way through all the joints using the same process, and I test fitted each joint afterwards. When I'd finished all the leg joints, I moved on to fitting the legs to the top. I marked out the centre of the top and the centre of the aprons, and then I clamped the aprons and stretchers together, making sure that they were all square and evenly spaced. I used the same dowel marker pins to align the holes on the top, and then I drilled the holes, pushed the dowels in, and then threw the leg assembly back on to test the alignment. The dowels line up perfectly. There's a slight bow on one of the aprons, but once the weight of the top is on it, it should straighten out. And then I was ready for the glue up. I started with the legs, and I slathered on a bunch of glue, and then I tapped in the dowels. I used bar clamps with a scrap wedge to squeeze the joint together. Now obviously there's only pressure on one side of the joint, but I have a cunning plan for this. To get even pressure all the way through the joint, I took a ratchet strap and ran it between the two bar clamps and then put a touch of tension on it. And now there should be fairly even pressure all the way through the joint. I only have one set of bar clamps, so I did one set of legs one day and then the other set the next day, with the exact same process. And then I laid the first set of legs back on top of the second set and tightened the ratchet strap until they matched. Before I attached the stretchers, I got to work finishing the legs. I hit them with 120 grit to start, and then I filled the nail holes with the same Starbond CA glue. Some of these nail holes went all the way through, so I backfilled them with regular wood glue before capping them with Starbond. I cleaned everything up with 320 grit, and then I was ready for final assembly. This was actually a lot easier than I expected. I glued and clamped the legs and then checked the aprons were square to the stretchers about 15 times because I was worried that the legs to top dowels wouldn't line up. The next day I came back and attached the top to the legs. Again, this went on a breeze, it just slipped straight into place. The last step was to apply oil. I threw 3 coats of Danish oil onto everything. It really brings out the natural rich colour of that timber, especially on the Rimu legs. When I started this project, I'd only built a couple of simple things, and I had limited experience with most of the tools that I used. But after watching many YouTube videos and doing endless research, I managed to turn the idea I had in my head into a real desk. I'm super stoked with how this came out. That black CA glue fits in great with the colour of the almost flawless top. And the simple leg design turned out even better than I could have hoped. All the joints came up super clean, I even surprised myself with that. And this float effect is a simple detail but adds so much character to the piece.
If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more DIY and wood revival content. Thanks for watching.